Board. I'm Grant Lindenberg, and today we're going to have a review and a bit of a how does it work. We're going to take a look at a new game from Revolution Games. It's Death of an Army by Kerry Anderson, and the subtitle here is Ypres 1914. So operational game on World War One. You know, there's not a glut in the market of operational games for World War One. It seems as a pretty underserved part of the wargaming hobby. But last year we had the excellent Verdun 1916 Storm of Steel, I think it was called, and now we have this new game from Revolution Games. I really like Revolution Games. I haven't been disappointed with anything I've had from them yet, and. But most of the games that I've had from them have been, I guess, World War II, or most of them are World War II, and I guess a few American Civil War games. This is the first time I've had a World War One game from them. For a World War One game, I have those images of giant artillery barrages and troops going over the top out of the trenches, the whole thing like that. This game definitely has the artillery barrages, but no mention of the trench work. Actually, this is being so early in the war, for all I know, the trenches, they weren't even entrenched and dug in yet, for all I know. I haven't really looked at the history that much. Anyway, I want to give you a kind of a look at how the game looks and how it works, and then I'll wrap up in the end with a few thoughts about how I think the whole thing played out and my experience with it. This is a good-looking package. The box and cover art for this game is really striking. So hats off to Mark Mahaffey for the box artwork and I guess the rulebook cover work and whatnot. The whole graphics team is great here. Charlie Kibler's counters, they're clean, readable. Mine are offset slightly, but nothing requiring replacements or anything like that. They are fine to play with. I've been playing with them. And Edmund Hudson's map is terrific. It's very plain with a muted palette, but eminently functional. It's kind of I don't know. It's stark but attractive at the same time. Personally, I might not have included the rail lines, given that they have no play value, but that's just a quibble. It's a beautiful looking package. Even the rule books here are a little nicer than older Revolution fare. There's two in this game, a series rule book and a 4-page exclusive rule book. So obviously Revolution is hoping the Great War Battles series catches on and they make a string of these World War I games. Map scale is 1,350 yards per hex. And units are battalions and brigades, but they're also organized into divisions. Turn length is measured in days. There's 2 shorter scenarios, and then the full campaign game, which is 24 turns, 24 days long. The map, as I said, is fairly simple, but it's worth discussing a little more as it's key to understanding the victory conditions. The hex types are clear, woods, village, city, or high ground, and that's it for the different terrain types. And then there's also streams, bridges, rivers, and canals as hex sides. So not a ton of different terrain here, but important to note because victory is totally determined by who controls the most high ground hexes in some scenarios, or isolated high ground hexes in the campaign game. So controlling the high ground is all important in victory, no matter which scenario you play. The game starts with a smattering of the French and British units strung along the middle of the map, with the Germans almost engaged in the south and then moving to engage in the center and north. The Allies won't be able to stop them getting an initial foothold on the giant Passchendaele higher ground feature in the middle of the board right off the first turn, but that's what they're kind of going to slam together there. That's the biggest amount of high ground in the game. There's smatterings of more of it all around, particularly a little farther to the south. This is an I go, you go game, but with defensive fire built in for the non-phasing player. Kerry Anderson has created an innovative sequence of play here. He reasons that offensives are planned overnight and executed in the next morning, so each player's turn goes like this. There's a planned offensive phase where you can attack from multiple hexes and bring all your artillery to bear. Then your movement phase, so that's a attack then move. And then finally there's another second attack phase called the hasty attack, where you can only attack from one hex at a time and you get no artillery support. It's sort of more like a exploitation type of attack. This to my mind works well. It feels like Anderson accomplished his goal. The planned assaults are bigger affairs, and the hasty attacks do have to be carefully considered, as you don't often get more than 1-to-1 odds after all those moves. Zones of control are fairly sticky here. You have to stop moving when you hit one, and you can't move from one zone of control to another. So that means if you want to get out of one and into another, you have to back up and move out before moving on to the second one. Other than that, movement's pretty straightforward. A few of the terrain types cost 2 MP to enter rather than 1, and the same with a few of the hex side types. Artillery units are either limbered or not, but they can flip back at fourth at any time, but only once per turn. So if you're limbered, you can move at the limbered rate and then unlimber at the end of your move. Or if you have an unlimbered unit that needs to move out of there fast, it can limber at the start of its move and scoot away, but will have to stay limbered until the next turn. And when limbered, artillery units have a far smaller range and firepower, but still have a little bit of a punch. One other key to movement: at the end of your movement phase, in any spots where you have 2 reduced units who've lost a step, say, in the same hex or adjacent to each other, you can combine them back into a full strength unit as long as neither of them are also adjacent to an enemy unit. This will become important later on, as units are constantly losing steps. The French and German units are 2-step units, and the British units are mostly 3-step units. The combat system is also novel. There's 2 combat charts, a fire combat results table and a melee table. The former serves to generate dice roll modifiers that ultimately get used on the latter. I know that sounds confusing. It took a little bit to get my head around, but it's not hard once you do it. Here's how a planned offensive goes if everything is in play. So you start with an offensive artillery bombardment, where the attacker totals all his eligible attacking artillery strength and rolls on the appropriate column on the fire combat table. With there could be a DRM for the defensive terrain, and this is going to generate a number between 0 and 6. Then it's the defender's turn for defensive fire, and they'll add up the strength of all the units in the target hex and then add in 1 eligible defensive artillery unit. They'll roll on that same defensive fire table, but they'll also use the number generated by the previous offensive artillery as a DRM. So it's going to give them a higher die roll, which will give them a lower net number. So they'll roll on the same table. They'll get a defensive fire number, so a new number. Note that lower numbers are best. So the number generated from the original offensive barrage will make the number generated by the defensive fire roll worse. I know that's a bit confusing, but anyway, that's the way it works. And then finally, it's time for the melee. It's a usual odds ratio thing here, with the odds of the attacking units versus the defenders to give you a column to roll on the melee combat's results table. And again, we use the number we generated from the defensive fire to modify this melee roll. And again, terrain may give it a column shift. This final result tells us how many attacking steps and how many defensive steps are lost. Finally, the defender may be able to avoid some losses by retreating, but if he avoids 1 step by retreating 1 hex, then the attacker gets to avoid an equal number of step losses. It sounds complicated, but once you get the hang of it, it's 3 rolls for each big attack, and the first roll gives a DRM for the second roll, which gives a DRM for the final roll, meaning the offensive barrage reduces the defensive fire, which reduces the actual attack in the end. There's also rules for counter battery fire and for harassing fire versus units moving in the open, and rules for attacking open ground from 1 hex away rather than being adjacent. So lots of little bits of chrome here. After the movement phase, hasty attacks are similar to the planned offensive, but with two big exceptions. There's no initial bombardment, meaning that defensive fire is going to be more effective, and you can only attack from 1 hex at a time. So it's mostly valuable for picking off understrength units after you've exploited a hold on the line or something like that. After one side does its planned offensive, movement, and hasty attacks, play flips over to the other side and they do theirs. There's a little housekeeping, checking for supply lines and things like that, and then it's on to the next turn. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to go over an example of a planned offensive, how the combat works. I know it sounds a little complicated, but it's really not. If we take a look at the example that I have here on the board, the green German units are attacking this French unit here. So the first thing that happens is the artillery bombardment, and in this case we have a single German artillery unit that's supporting the bombardment. Perhaps let's well, we'll just go with the one. So they've just only got three strength points to bombard with. So what will happen is they'll roll on the 3 column here. Can I get that into a little better focus maybe? So it'll be the 3 column here, and let's just say for the sake of teaching that they roll a 2. So we go down the 3 column, cross on the 2, we get a 2. So that means that 2 is going to be the modifier when the French strike back with their defensive roll. Now, the French have 4 strength points plus 2 artillery. So they're going to be on the 6th column. So they're going to be on a bigger column than the Germans were. But it's worth noting that had the Germans had, say, 3 or 4 available artillery units, they could have put all of them into the initial bombardment, whereas the defender can only use a single artillery unit for the defensive fire. So anyway, we have 6. We're going to be on the 6th column for the French here, and so that's this column here. And remember, we had a +2 to the dice, so that's gonna push the number down a little bit. So let's just say we rolled a 3. We're going to add 2 to make it 5. So 5 across on the 6. That gives us another 2 for the final DRM, because the last thing we do is now we look at the actual units attacking. We've got a 5 and a 4 attacking a 4. That's so 9 to 4. That's going to be on the 2 to 1 column. We're going to go over the melee table and go down the 2 to 1 column, and we're going to have a +2 is going to be the modifier there, because that's what we generated from the defensive fire. Well, we'll just roll one. Oh, a 5. So that's pretty terrible. High rolls are worse. So on the 2 to 1 column, we had a 5, and there was a +2. That gets us to the 7. And the way these work is, well, it's a 1 and 1. And the results are the attacker and defender losses. So in this case, either the French will accept the loss and flip over, and then the Germans will have to match that loss, or because we're in clear hex, up to one retreat point can be up to 1 loss can be scrapped by retreating. So in that case, the French, instead of flipping and having a loss, they could retreat 1 hex, but that would also mean then the Germans didn't have to take a loss either. So whatever the defender avoids in terms of losses, the attacker gets to avoid as well. So that's just a quick look at how simple the combat really is. It's the first roll generates a DRM for the second roll, which generates a DRM for the third roll. And when you get to the so you do all the planned attacks, and then once you get to, then you do the movement, and then you can do the hasty attacks. In those, it's even simpler because there is no initial preparatory bombardment. There's just the defensive fire, and then the melee attack. So, yeah, that's it. That's all there is to an attack. Very simple once you get in the flow of it. So that's how the game basically works. There's other bits of Chrome, of course. There's a few units that are restricted on what they can do in the first turns of the game. There's rules for artillery that is limbered, firing over open sights at a reduced rate, but being able to fire while they're limbered. There's also, I don't think I mentioned in the game, but there's also as well as the brigade artillery or the divisional artillery that's assigned to each unit. There's also corps artillery that allows you to add. You don't. Each side doesn't have a ton of it, but it grows and grows as the game goes on, and each side can choose where they're going to make their big push and add in their higher assets of artillery to help out with the lower units. The game takes a while to get the feel of how it's going to work, because the way the game works, there's 20, 24 turns, something like that, and each side is getting reinforcements along the way. The one side then the other, but back and forth, back and forth. It's not just one big push and then another big push. As well, the British get some, rather than just reinforcements, they get some reinforcement points where they're allowed to build some of their step losses back up, and that gradually increases over the game. So to get the real feeling for how the game works, it's constantly one side pushing and the other side pushing back and forth and back and forth. As well, the British and the French, for the most part, bring their reinforcements on from the west side, whereas the Germans can bring theirs on from the east, but they can also come, one of their armies can bring in reinforcements from the north, and that's where they would engage the French more. So the French have to not only protect against what's coming from the east, but they also have to be aware of protecting their northern flank, because the Germans can come in from that side as well. I found I really enjoyed the three-step attack mechanism. I thought that what Kerry Anderson was trying to go for there with the day starts with a prepared attack where you have massed artillery, the defenders defending against that, and then the rush, the melee, the trying to take the ground, and then movement, and then any other attacks that come after that being hasty attacks, that showing that after any large offensive, then there's scattered movement and a few isolated lesser skirmishes, but they don't have the big artillery help the way that the planned offensive do. I really enjoyed this game. I played the initial scenario once and the full campaign game, and really found that it was a real back and forth in terms of those reinforcements and where you were going to place them, and as well the upper level artillery keeps increasing and increasing and increasing and becomes more of a factor in the game. It's really it's a real game of attrition. That business I pointed out before, where if you have two units that have been step reduced and they're next to each other and they're not next to a enemy unit, them being able to recombine into a single unit, that's really helpful. I used that a ton during the game. I'd recommend this game. I played it once solo, as I said, and now I've got 2 ongoing games of it, live Vassal, and we're going to give a go to a PBM vassal of it as well, but I'm not sure that it's going to really suit the PBM play the way it'll suit live vassal play. The module is great, and the module developer has been anything I've brought up to say, hey, how does this work, or do you think maybe that should happen? He's either pointed me in the right direction or made a quick fix to the module. It's a great module, but I think that there might be a little bit too much back and forth in terms of the planned offensive, the defensive fire, then the melee. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it'll all go smoothly. I mean, I play a lot of different games by Vassal PBEM, and I suppose if you can play Squad Leader by PBEM, you can play almost anything. So we'll give it a go and see how it goes. Anyway, I recommend this game. As I mentioned before, the artwork I think is fantastic, and the counters of the map the same way. I'm gonna be playing this for a while, I'm quite sure. So that's Death of an Army, Ypres 1914. I hope you enjoyed the review, and check out my podcast, pushingcardboard.com. You can catch it on Apple's iTunes or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, or just come to the website at pushingcardboard.com, and all the episodes can be played directly from the browser as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.